Hey everybody, CVH here with an Elder Scrolls Legends card analysis video. As you can see on screen, the card we're going to analyze in today's video is none other than Mantikora, a card that is basically a staple 3 of in every control deck that you'll probably encounter on the ladder, namely Control Mage, Control Spellsword, those decks. Before I get into the actual analysis though, I'd like to talk a bit about the video in general, the analysis videos that I might turn into a series. The reason I decided to do this is because it was actually a recommendation from my Twitch chat. They said they'd like some sort of a video where I just take a card, as I'm doing now, talk about the pros, the cons, how it's used, basically just, analyze it, and come to some conclusions about it. So that's basically what I'm going to do here, and focus mostly on the constructed playability of these cards, although I'll probably touch into Arena as well, because the values do change somewhat for a lot of these cards. So Mantikora, the reason I chose this particular card to start off the series is a couple of reasons. The first of all, like I said, this is basically a 3 of in all the control decks you'll encounter. Since we're focusing on constructed playability, a lot of these cards will already be good. Like, we'll know these cards are good, but the point of the series is to find out why they're good and how good they are, basically. The other reason is because, in relation to it being good, many people have actually said that they think this card is overpowered. I've seen a lot of Reddit comments, a lot of Twitch comments. Basically, I think this card is potentially just a little too good. Apparently it was a legendary creature in the closed beta, but was demoted to an epic for ease of craftability. Don't quote me on that, because I didn't actually get to play in closed beta much. But yeah, in this particular analysis video, we'll be looking at the card as I would normally look at any card, with the question in the back of our minds of, is this card overpowered? Of course, for a lot of these cards, they're probably not overpowered, but we know a lot of the cards I will analyze are good, so throughout the videos, we're just basically going to be, figuring out what makes them good. Alright, so let's look at Mantikora. Very basic level, 10 Magicka, 6/6, guard, summon, destroy an enemy creature. Straightforward card, but it does have some depth to the design. So basically, when we're looking at whether a card is overpowered or whether or not it's good, basically all it really comes down to is how much value for the Magicka you're getting. And value can be any number of things depending on the type of deck you're playing. Certain decks place more value on card draw and card advantage. Certain decks place more value on, just basic stat lines and hitting your opponent for a bunch. Obviously 6/6 is not a lot of stat points for a 10 Magicka card, so this card is going to have to find the value elsewhere. And where it does find the value is in what I like to call the Javelin effect. Piercing Javelin is like the most straightforward removal card in the game, just an action that says Prophecy, destroy a creature. Without the Prophecy, it's just, this is a card that destroys a creature, so we can call it the Javelin effect. So first we have to decide how much value we place on the Javelin effect, which is just destroy a creature. And if we really look at Javelin, it's actually probably a bit overcosted because it also has Prophecy, which is kind of an insane effect for any card. That means it can potentially be played for free if it happens to be in your runes. So another card that I think is a good, good indicator of the value we have in the Javelin effect is actually not Javelin at all, it's Edict of Azura. So this is a 4 cost. As we can see, it's in the Spellsword colors, so another one of those cards you might see in the control decks. Destroy an enemy creature or support card. Most of the time this is going to be targeting a creature. Against some decks it's a support card. This costs one whole Magicka less than the Javelin. We do expect cards that are in 2 colors to have slightly more value for the Magicka because they are in 2 colors, and thus only like a very small percentage of decks can actually play them, whereas a ton of decks can play Javelin. All you have to do is play, Willpower to play Javelin, but you have to play Willpower and Endurance to play Edict. So we expect it to be better. It also has slightly more, versatility because it can target support cards, which I think sort of cancels out the boost we expect for it being in 2 colors. So I'm going to make the assumption here that the Javelin effect, which is just destroy a creature, is worth about 4 Magicka, because while this card does have an additional benefit, it also can only be used in these 2 colors, so I think if it was just a single color 4 cost destroy a creature, that would be about what we expect. But as we can tell, Mantikora is definitely a creature, not an action, so it has stat points. It's a 6/6 with guard. So in addition to Edict, this one's a much easier comparison because we actually do have a 6/6 with guard in the game, and it's Mountain Tyrant. 6-drop, 6/6 guard. So Mountain Tyrant, even though it doesn't see a whole lot of constructed play, it seems about costed as you'd expect. It's a 6-drop, 6/6, which isn't very good for a 6-drop, but it gets guard, which is one of the better keywords, definitely one of the best for like a control deck, so perhaps if Sentry Tiger didn't exist, Mountain Tyrant would see more play just because it has that one less health that makes it a little bit worse. But okay, we can basically say a 6/6 with guard is worth about 6. We can basically say the Javelin effect, which we see in Edict, is worth about 4. So all that's left to do for this sort of value is to run the numbers, which I have taken the liberty of doing. Javelin effect, which is 4, plus Mountain Tyrant, which is effectively 6 Magicka, equals Mantikora, which is 10. So, at the core of the card, we see that it's costed correctly. However, this doesn't take into consideration one of the most important things, which is basically, there's a word for this that I'm thinking of. Basically, all-encompassing cards. Like, this card does two things for the price of one, basically, which is not only relevant when we're talking about card advantage. Like, if you can do two things with two cards, you'd rather do two things with one card because it's probably just more efficient for your card advantage, which a control deck cares about a lot. It's also more efficient when you're thinking about slots in your deck. Like, you don't really want to put Mountain Tyrant and another removal action in your deck when you can simply play Mantikora, and on turn 10, if you have 10 Magicka, this is just simply a better drop because, hey, it gets two things done, and it's also putting the body on board. So the value of this card really is that it can be a huge tempo swing in the fact that not only are you getting the summon effect of destroying an enemy creature, but you're also getting a 6/6 guard. So these are two things control decks care about a lot. You want card advantage, you want removal, basically targeted removal like Edict and Javelin are the prime examples of this, and you want guards because without them you have a hard time stalling against aggressive decks. You might think it's easy to write this card off, as I think a lot of people did, as being a 10 cost. When they first started playing the game, you really don't know the meta, and you're like, I don't know if we're actually going to see decks that can get to 10 consistently, and if they do they really want to overload their deck with like 3 Mantikoras plus like Odaving or whatever else they might be running? As it turns out, the answer is yes, and this card is probably well deserving of a 3-drop slot in all the control decks currently. What this card does, it obviously doesn't help you too much against the aggressive decks by itself. You need to actually get to the late game, but when you finally get to around turn 9 with the Elixir of Magicka or turn 10, there really is no better defensive option in control decks. It doesn't gain you life or anything, but it's taking a lot of damage off the board, ideally when you play it and you're getting rid of a threat your opponent might have out, and you can also strategically place it in a lane where they have something else. If they have an attacker in each lane, you can plop it down in one lane that you think you're better at guarding, and then destroy possibly an even bigger threat in whatever other lane there is. You can also use it in conjunction with another guard that you might have played earlier, not necessarily the Mountain Tyrant on the screen right now, but like if Hive Defender is in one of your lanes, you can put the Mantikora in the other lane, and not only are you now defending both lanes against a potential charge attack, but you're also obviously getting the real value of Mantikora, which is killing something, right? Because obviously if it didn't kill something, it would be a way overcosted Mountain Tyrant. And as it turns out, control decks such as Control Mage really don't feel any sort of pain in running all this redundant removal. 3 Javelins and 3 Mantikora, good to go, with some AoE like Dawn's Wrath and Ice Storm, perfectly fine, that's what the deck wants to be doing. Spell Sword has even more removal because we can see the Edict of Azura on screen, which is, a card that Mage obviously doesn't have access to. But still, you find people cutting Edicts and other cards much sooner than cutting Manikoras. Mantikora being that 2-for-1 value of both a guard and destroying an enemy creature. This is a card that you'll probably see as a 3 of in basically every control deck if your opponent owns 3 of them, which they probably do since this is only an epic and they're playing control decks with a bunch of legendaries. So do we think this card is overpowered? As we can see on screen, 4 plus 6 equals 10, but it gets additional value because it's like a 2-for-1 card. Dealing 2 things usually means that it's better than the single card counterparts like Edict and Tyrant. This card just does more for the cost, which is still basically the same when you add it together as we did on screen. However, I think it costs so much at that point, being a 10 cost. Not that control decks can't get there, like we discussed, control decks can easily get to 10 Magicka, but the fact that it is a 10 cost, we do expect it to have additional value. I don't think this card would see nearly as much play if it cost 11, just because the relevance of the time it comes down, since it's a huge tool against those aggressive strategies, those mid-range strategies that are going to try to push you out of the game with like tons of pressure. The fact that one Magicka more as a cost would actually be really detrimental to the card's use. Not really the value, but just the fact that it comes down one turn later. You wouldn't be able to stabilize in a bunch of games that you currently can stabilize in. And that's really, I think, what makes the card very good. It can be upsetting in control mirror matches when you have Mantikora battles, you're Manikoring their dude, they're Manikoring your Mantikora, oh look, I top decked another Mantikora. But you always have the redundancy of all these removal cards, and it just seems, I think, broken because all those matchups always go to turn 10. I think the card is fairly costed. You do expect a card that costs 10 to have better value for its cost than a card that costs 2. Like, I would play a 2/3 that costs 2 with no additional effect in the arena, but a 10 cost has to do a lot. It can't just be a 10/11. That doesn't do enough. We have to see an increase in stats proportionally, or an increase in value such as we see here. And speaking of arena, that's basically the last thing to talk about. In arena, this card is still good. It's definitely not a snap take as it might be in a control deck. Like if you for some reason were drafting a constructed deck, like you were drafting an arena deck, you see a couple epics. Mantikora is probably one of the first epics you include. In arena, you probably have to think about your curve a lot more, and oftentimes a card like Edict of Azura is a better pick depending on your curve, because you're not going to get to 10 a whole lot, and in a lot of the arena decks you'll be building, they're going to have more of a mid-range focus, and when you get to turn 10, you'll probably want to be trying to close out the game and playing proactive threats in that sense, as opposed to a reactive threat like Mantikora, which does have to be dealt with, but it's not putting as much pressure on the board. If you can draft a perfect control deck, this would obviously be a perfect card for it, but in general you want to be hopefully proactively closing the game out, but I wouldn't hate having a card like this in my deck. It's definitely very good removal. It's just a matter of your curve at that point. But definitely good in arena, definitely fantastic in constructed. Don't think it's busted, think it's probably a fine card. I think as we see more removal options in the future for control decks, which I know a lot of you are like, oh, we don't need more removal, but we're going to get more removal in the future, I'm sure. Whether or not it phases out Mantikora, I think is more of an issue on the metagame itself, whether or not decks can still afford to play this many 10 costs and 11 costs and what happens to be cut. But as of now, I expect to see it for a long time, and if you're looking to build a control deck, I do suggest crafting these ASAP. That's basically it for the video. Hopefully you all enjoyed this analysis on Mantikora. If you did, feel free to subscribe, check out betweenthelane.net and my stream link, which will be in the description below, and I'll see you guys next time.